You're listening to the Business Per Usual Show, a podcast for innovative entrepreneurs and professionals who want to stay ahead of the curve. I'm your host, Michelle Taylor, founder of a marketing and advertising agency specializing in crafting dynamic brands and scaling businesses. I am so excited to have Ginny Waller. She is the founder and CEO of Capacity to Dream. Ginny is the former executive director of the largest freestanding sexual assault services agency in South Carolina. She is also a licensed lawyer in the state of South Carolina. She has more than 17 years of experience in nonprofit leadership, development, strategic planning, and operational efficiency. She specializes in change management and relationship building, which we all know is really hard. And it's the season and phase of collective society right now with the election coming up next week. I cannot think of a better guest at a better time the week before the election. We're not here to get into politics, but we're going to talk about something every candidate and politician should listen to: executive presence. We've got Ginny here. Ginny, thank you for joining. In this podcast, we dive right into things. So I would love to you tell us about executive presence, why it's important, that what you see the impact of it in the organizations you work with.
Yeah, thank you. I think, Michelle, thank you for having me on. I think the first thing is we probably shouldn't have led with the lawyer thing because people probably quit listening when they heard that I'm not a popular profession. Please forgive me. I don't necessarily represent from that angle anymore. And the second is I would say all politicians should be listening to the conversation about executive presence right now. Executive presence, an interesting concept, especially in our virtual world. It's very difficult in the nonprofit sector to find individuals that have attained what I would consider an executive presence. There's a lot of living in the weeds and doing the work. So you may one day as an executive director be cleaning your toilets, and then the next day you're in a board meeting having a negotiation on a new lease or about your own employment agreement. It is very difficult at times to maintain that executive presence demanded of you in your role. And the whole other thing is in nonprofit team environments, we're in this together, right? If we're in this together, I'm one of you. And I'm working towards this common goal. Do we want this to be a family working together? I hear that a lot. To have proper executive presence, it can't be a familial unit that backfires. You have to be in a position of authority, set decision making, and show where the buck stops with the executive. Hopefully that'll get us started on talking about executive presence.
I think we both have worked in so many different nonprofits. And I think the nature too, as a consultant, you get to the heart of the organization fast. We have both seen leaders approach their culture in different ways. Some are very much like, we are a family. And then we've gone to the other side of the spectrum where I'm sure you've also worked in nonprofits and in for profit, where it's the other side. It's like very cold and hierarchical. Then there's a glass tower that the executives live in, and everyone else exists and operates in this separate world. So, like, when you're thinking of a leader who is like striking, and even if it's mythical, like a leader who strikes the perfect balance of approachability, but also, like you said, like being a leader and people having that structure that actually gives them, just like when we're kids, we crave the boundaries. Kids push the boundaries because they want boundaries. Describe whether it's a real leader and a real org that strikes a great balance. Paint a picture for listeners of what that could look like.
You make a good point about extremes, right? We do have the familial, we're going to make exceptions for some, be casual in how we treat our conversations, not documenting anything, going all the way to the other side where we put such restrictions in place that people don't feel a sense of autonomy and independence and decision making and being valued for the professional that they are. There's a moderation for everything. Successful leaders I've seen have a few qualities that help them be good leaders. It's hard to pinpoint one individual as fully successful. I think there are those that have led with one of these qualities really well, and maybe they were weaker in another area, but they found someone that was able to help them at that executive level to be balanced a little bit more. The characteristics I would say really start with complete authenticity, being a genuine human that puts themselves with all their faults forward. They're not trying to fake it till they make it, maybe internally, but externally, they're really showing their flaws. Allows people to offer grace to that leader, but also to themselves. And that is going to spurn people to work harder for you. If you can show, like, I'm one of you. Yes, I make the decisions, but I am one of you, then people feel like they are working together to help the whole thing be successful. The second thing is there has to be, and this is true with parenting too, you have to make decisions clearly and equitably with consistency. If for one person or department, you're making one decision, and for another, you're making a different decision, and it's really erratic. And sometimes it just depends on how you woke up that morning. You are not going to be respected as a leader. You're likely going to be feared, even if you're authentic. So even if you're doing that, they're still going to be like, I don't know how Jenny's coming today. I don't know if we should ask her about that question. You want to be someone who can look at a situation and say, we're going to apply this equitably across the board. If we can foresee how this might impact decision making, great. And maybe that's going to affect how we treat this situation now. But you want to make decisions not in the bubble of one specific thing, but decisions for later on. That is huge. I can give examples of leaders that have not done that. And that'll take down an executive director in a heartbeat. Part of this that folds into authenticity and genuineness is honesty. You're going to get a direct answer. It's going to be the truth. It may not be the truth you want. It may be uncomfortable, but you're going to get it when you need to hear it from the beginning instead of later on. That kind of leader is someone that you're going to be able to respect and trust. So I remember a long time ago, Michelle, going to a training where they were doing a scenario where they had an employer talking at lunch with a coworker, talking about, well, I've got this big review coming up today. I'm going to be reviewing this guy, and he has been terrible all year long. Terrible. He's not performing. He's just a mess. I've got to address it today. It's just bad. And you flash over to the coworker or this worker, and he's in the lunchroom with one of his peers, and he's got my review today. Going to be getting a bonus. Super excited. I've been killing it this year, hitting all the marks. And of course, they go into that room. Both of them are completely shocked that the other one's reality is so distorted from what they know to be the truth. And that all came down to that supervisor not being direct about what they were telling them from the get-go and making sure that individual knew what was working and what was not working, and that honesty kind of making such a difference.
As a listener, and when looking at our podcast and just on our social media, our following is divided between nonprofit leaders and small to medium business owners. And
Sure.
so I think that's one thing too, not even just the nonprofit leader, but for the small to medium business owner, for many of us, we're learning how to lead our own businesses for the first time. Even if you've been a leader in an organization, it is a different experience when everything A to Z begins and ends with you. There's no existing leadership team to step into. I think that was a really powerful depiction of what it looks like to lead a team, not just for the nonprofit leader, but also for the entrepreneur who has made their first hires as entrepreneurs. You make your first hire and you're like, oh, I got this. Like because I
Mhm.
just need help with XYZ. Then you turn around and you are realizing that each of these people have completely different approaches to life, viewpoints, and past experiences. Just because something works a way for you and doesn't mean that translate directly to them. I think those are really great things, really helpful for conversations I've been having with entrepreneur friends. One thing we talked about with fellow entrepreneurs is this balance between being the micromanaging leader
Yeah.
and being the ghost. That's one thing I wanted to ask you about. You talked about these amazing pillars to be
Yeah.
checking yourself on as a leader: your authenticity, vulnerability, honest communication, setting realistic expectations. And so, really looking at the holistic impact of your decisions for nonprofit leaders and entrepreneurs, because many of us are running businesses with fully remote teams and
Yep.
hybrid teams. But what I've noticed as someone who pops in and out of a lot of organizations around the country is that nonprofits, for profits, big and small, are doing more with less. Right now, they're doing more with less staff, with less funding. We know the economy is tight and there's a lot of uncertainty ahead. In a climate where everyone is pushing hard, doing business fully remote, and you're trying to extend yourself into so many ways, what are the leaders you're seeing do really well, even if it's not 100% ideal, but
Yeah.
just like they're doing something really great, whether it's like a way that they communicate with their teams or
Yeah.
how they make space to be present without being a micromanager. I'd love if you can share a couple of really practical, tactical things that folks could think about doing to increase that boots on the ground or the executive presence that people really feel.
Yeah. I think there's a few things it's going to be in your leadership that you're going to want to start. Micromanagement or overreach into someone else's job doesn't start with tasks at that level. It starts further back with your personality. It comes down to setting clear expectations. If I want to hire someone to dictate how to do a job, then I'm going to hire someone so I can dictate to tell them how to do the job. As long as I'm clear, this is personal to me. I'm an entrepreneur too. That's my business. I hire people, but I'm very clear that I'm going to be XYZ type of manager with you. I need the following task done and I need it done the following way if that's what I'm needing. Or if I need them to develop a curriculum on a specific thing, I'm going to be very clear. I'm going to hand this to you. You're going to do this exactly the way you think is best. And I'm trusting you to do that. And now I'm done. Goodbye. I'm all done sign language because my kids and I do that. I'm done. It just means you haven't set clear expectations. If you're now
Oh,
calling me
that's
a
so good, Jenny.
micromanager,
Yeah.
well, it's because we didn't set that clear. We're going to set that very much up from the very beginning. And remote, in person, it doesn't matter. We're going to have that set up. I think there's amazing modern systems in place with AI and things like Asana. That's my favorite. Trello or any of those other project management boards that really can help with here you go. Here goes the assignment. You do what you got to do. We'll check in on occasion, but otherwise, this is happening out here in this world. What's happening, especially if you're a solopreneur, it's your business, it's your baby. You want it to be successful. If you're an executive director, it's your nonprofit, you answer to a board. Set yourself up for success by making sure the expectations are clear and that you have tools in place so that everyone is very openly doing their work and there's nothing but trust going on where we're supporting each other exactly where we said we would do that.
Oh,
I'm not
Jenny,
sure
that
if I
is
answered all
so,
that.
no, that is so good. And honestly, it made me think of a situation I hadn't thought of in a long time. A few years ago, when I was working with the CEO of a large organization, I was acting as their interim head of marketing. CEO, even a few weeks in, was like very much in the weeds and dictating some things that were, I would think, typically would be too small for their kind of purview, like very much in the weeds. But then at the same time, I never mind someone being really specific of, oh, I really love it phrased this way, or I can't, I work with people all the time. I can't stand this word. Let's never use this word. And she always seemed frazzled and stressed. Of, there's not enough of me to go around. I feel like I need to be in all these projects. I wish I could step away, but I can't. We were working together and the team was really stressed because they always felt like, all right, but what is she going to say? I remember going to her and having a conversation. I asked, I see you want to step away. You don't want to be in the weeds this much. You don't want to have your hands directly in the copy of a social media post. This was an org of about 150 people. So
Wow.
it wasn't a tiny little org where everyone was used to jumping in all the time. I said, you have great ideas and improve things when you touch them. But what do you need to feel confident enough that you don't have a knee jerk reaction of almost like this scarcity mindset that if I don't touch it, if
Mhm.
I don't have my eyes and hands on it, then somehow it is going to cause
Gonna
something
fail.
catastrophic. It's not even
Mhm.
just going to fail, it's going to make a negative impact on the
Yeah.
organization.
Right.
She just sat there for a minute and she was like, you're right. We had a great conversation. And she said, you know what? I'm going to need a few days to sit and think of what I need. What is causing me to have this knee jerk reaction? It's almost like a compulsion. We meet again that following Monday. She said, I talked about it with my husband. I talked about it with my therapist. I could not figure
Mhm.
out what is causing this knee jerk reaction. She said, I have an incredible leadership team full of very independent women who know what they're doing and are thought leaders because everyone is so independent. What I actually need is the status report on where things are and like just like a bulleted list. She was like, because when I feel that I can have it on my time to go in and take a look at what's going out, the status
Yeah.
report, and to like even feedback of, oh, and this is how it was received and our plan in response to that. She said, I think that would really help me to not always be hounding your door
Yeah.
because when I don't hear something, even if we've already talked earlier in the week, this I have a knee jerk reaction that it's not getting done. I said, "No problem. I'll give you a daily status report on Teams." I started sending her the status report, and it was night and day. She was able to step back. It was something we implemented with the team, but I hadn't thought of that in a long time. Thinking through a manager may not be the same kind of manager for every type of project, for every single employee. And so I think it is so important, like you said, self awareness, examining what you need for yourself to be comfortable. Like, what are the parameters that require someone else to use their perspective and their approach to take the lead and you step back? But then also, what are the parameters that you do need to dictate? Because there are those projects where it is very specific and you
Yeah.
need to dictate it. And that's okay. And like you said, being really transparent with your team what those parameters are so that they are set up for success and they're not just thinking, oh, they're micromanaging because they don't trust me. That's not always the
Right.
case.
Exactly. Good on you for having that really honest conversation
I was
with
scared,
someone you're working
scared out
with.
of my mind initially.
I love it. That's great. I coach people to do that, and it's tough. So good for you. And it sounds like it was an amazing result. The leader has to know what they're going to need. Like you said, being very much aware. One of the things that I've done, because I go in interim engagements, when I come into an organization, I'm clear with the leadership. You may not have been meeting with your previous executive director one on one. You may have been meeting every 2 weeks as a staff group. We're going to do a one on one meeting once a week. We're going to review what you're working on. You're just going to give me an update. If I've got any problems or things that I'm seeing, I'm going to let you know. And if you've got any problems, you're going to tell me so see how I can help you. If it takes 5 minutes, awesome. If it takes an hour, okay. But that's your time. We're going to have it every week because I need to know you're where you are and don't need help from me. That's how I've set it so that communication is always there. And then, of course, you're using some sort of project management tool, we'll check in between, but nothing's getting dropped. I think that's imperative. Most leaders don't make time for that one on one. I'm
Yeah.
not interested in another dang meeting. I get it. People don't want to meet. If it's 10 minutes, we're checking in, reading sauna, great. But that is part of it, that communication piece. I want to over communicate. I want you saying, I don't want to hear about that project again for a hot minute. That's how much we should have communicated about it, just so that everybody's on the same page.
Jenny, I love this. This is so good. And honestly, even when you over communicate, like, you get to the point where you're like, all right, let's stop talking about it. We talked about it so much. It's making me think of, it's like as someone has done a lot of interim contracts and my different teams, the teams that have been over communicating, there was also a much stronger sense of shared ownership of the goals and the
Yes.
project. It didn't feel like a baton race where I did my part, I'm done, when I'm off on my own world. That's where it felt the most supportive and the most shared responsibility, where we were all responsible for the success of the project. We celebrated the win instead of one person feeling like they're like hiding in a corner. Everyone is, man, that sucks. Like we did it, we
Yeah.
worked hard. Let's figure out what didn't work and why it didn't work. It was a much more positive and productive experience than in the teams I've worked with, where it was more of that culture of the baton handoff and like, I've
Yeah.
done my part.
That's where you get that family feel that you're looking for without it being then the unrealistic family sort of environment and structure for an organization culture. You can get it because you're all on the same team, working together, communicating and collaborating at a high level. For entrepreneurs, I remind myself, no one's going to care about my business the way that I care about my business. No one. And my expectation has to be real. If I get someone to care about a project and I'm collaborating with them, they want it to succeed. We can make that be what the goal is and what the focus is, and really how you can get people to work towards a common goal together, even if it's not a mission oriented organization.
Oh my goodness. This is so good. And it's so applicable to nonprofit leaders, entrepreneurs, I think to anyone that is a leader of people bringing a team together. There is a little bit of time. I would love to talk about boards, which I know that you have so much great experience in rallying boards and board culture. One thing, as you know, I've made my rounds with nonprofits over the past 12 years, especially since COVID, even boards that were really engaged before COVID, boards have become perfunctory
Mhm.
for people are just sitting in the seats and
Yeah.
they're signing off on things, but not advancing the mission.
Yeah.
They're not advocates or bringing in new donors or even making gifts themselves. I would love to get your perspective on what you've seen in the board landscape, and then we can get into some more tactical things as leaders are looking to re-engage their boards.
We could go down the rabbit hole of how I feel about the structure of utilizing a community board to run a nonprofit is a broken system that needs to be reevaluated. COVID and the times post COVID have amplified those problems. I work primarily with executive directors or with boards who need an executive director. I'm coming into organizations that are typically in crisis, and this board who has been disengaged for a while suddenly wakes up and they don't have a leader, whether it's their fault or someone else's, whatever it may be, they don't have a leader. They've been checked out. It has ramped up a lot post COVID. Some of that is the very nature of the work, right? These are volunteers who are giving their time. They have their own jobs, they have their own families. Your organization is coming way down on the list of priorities for them. So, rightly, there is some amount of disengagement, some amount of rubber stamping. For an executive director, it is like this tightrope balancing where you want them to be involved, but be careful what you ask for because they may be involved in the wrong way or too much. And so there's this rule, kind of balance that you're always playing. I think because COVID made us move so quickly and the whole process of doing what the workplace looked like and coming up with something different had to be done without the board. They were dealing with their crisis. We had to do that as executive directors and leaders. It made us take more control than we probably needed to. The balance was lost and we leaned towards doing it all on our own because we needed to make decisions. Now we're coming back to the world of where we need to find that balance. Boards need to be involved in governance. They need to be involved. We need to make sure they stay on their side of the rope, but they need to be more engaged in decisions about strategy, finances, funding the organization, and the things that fit within their governance role and their duties and obligations under the law. We need to find that path of re-engaging them. Do I have the answer, Michelle? No. I'm not serving as an interim director. Since I've been there, 4 board members resign because when you start holding people accountable, they're like, whoa, I didn't sign up for this. And I don't blame them, by the way, for resigning. They didn't have time to do it, and they didn't know they were expected to do all these things. Remember that whole expectations thing? We've got to do that with boards too. I'm seeing this mass exodus of board members because to hold them to that level is such a high expectation when that wasn't set in the beginning. It's going to be hard to get boards to engage at the level we need moving forward if we're always laying on them the mission work. I hear executive directors go into their board meetings and they're like, Susie did XYZ. What am I going to do with her? So I wrote her up. And I had to go over here and we were doing this activity and Bob and Cindy didn't show. And then we only had 20 people do this, our program, the educational session. They brain dump because they don't have anyone else to share this information with. And the board's like, you look around, the board's looking up at the ceiling and making their to-do list on their paperwork. We're using them in the wrong way and not as the governance board. They're going to care as much as we do. We've got to be clear about what expectations we have for people we're bringing in to help us, whether it's an employee or board member. I think it all works the same, right? Those relationships are employees are disengaging, just like our board. It comes down to setups with expectations and clarity around what we need from them. I'm very different as an executive director of what I need from my boards than maybe another executive director would be. Very clear. This is the line you're going to follow. This is my expectation of how much you're going to be involved. That could be different for another leader. As long as you're clear about that from the get-go, you're going to have a good relationship with an engaged board.
A lot of organizations, just the economy and how tight things are. I'm seeing nonprofit operational budgets get tighter over the past few years. Executive directors almost be held hostage by their boards. They feel there's more fear that if they call their shot and say, these are expectations, especially if, like you said, during COVID, everyone was in crisis. The org had to act quickly and make choices. Everyone had their own individual crisis and collective crisis, so they couldn't rely on the board and lean on them. I've seen a lot of executive directors, even if they had an engaged board, because they have gone now for several years without having those expectations, they're almost scared the board might walk away or become more disengaged. I cannot wait to hear your answer to this. If there's an executive director and they're like, because of everything in the world, we have stopped with those clear expectations and really expecting anything from our board. If they asked you, how do I start that back? How do I reset? How do I go from whatever you want, please show up, treating them with kid gloves, to reestablishing expectations and holding board members to that?
Yeah, that's great. I don't want an executive director to ever have to say, please show up. Like, even like that makes me mad. Having to beg someone to spend an hour hearing about how hard you worked to make this mission successful. Executive directors do not beg. You deserve more. You work way too hard. Board resets are actually the same as an employee reset. So you're going to go within the board and find those individuals who also are frustrated because they're like, I'm working. Why aren't these people showing up? Get it together, Bob. They want to see you get support from your board of directors. So you got them involved. If they're key people, especially like committee chairs, even better. So you're going to get them engaged in helping you hold the others accountable. Your board leadership is also really important. If you have a board chair who's also part of the problem, figuring out a way to rotate them off, and you may need to adjust your timeline, but that'll be part of it. One of the things I think board staff or executive directors are scared of is the board members leaving. I celebrate board members leaving because that means everybody is aware of what's going on. We are all on the same page. Bob knows this is what she's going to expect for me to do with this organization. And he knows that he can't meet that expectation. And so he's going to step away to make a spot for someone else who can. Thank you, Bob. I support you so much. We're going to always have a great relationship and hopefully recruit him back because he knows you run a great board. So don't be afraid of that. In fact, that means you're doing the right things. And then being able to get cheerleaders on your board to lead the change. You're going to support them to make the change. You're not going to be the one to do it. Executive directors can have this energy. When I did board member interviews with the governance committee, I would say it is your God, your faith, if you have one, your family, your job, and this organization, or this is not the organization for you. That's the culture I build here. That's what I believe in. I brought in board members and had other board members recruit other board members that had that same culture and that same ideal. So we presented that to new people. Don't be afraid if you're creating that culture for people to walk away from that. That's a scary, strong culture, if that's the one that you want. And being okay with that, but letting your leadership, your allies within it be the ones to do it so that it's not putting you in an awkward spot as executive director who also answers to this board of directors.
Oh, Jenny, this is so good. This is incredible. I have so many CEO friends, executive director friends that are in this similar spot of evaluating if they're ready for this precipice of change with their board and really calling some really hard, heavy shots that they know that they're just going to have to stand firm and that people are going to get off the bus. When people get off the bus, it gives a chance for the right people to get on and help drive change in the right direction. I know we're almost at time. I also wanted to ask about they're really looking at change, how you can like those steps to that. And that was so practical and tactical and amazing. What do you see as common themes in boards that are very engaged, that are also really, really fundraising partners too.
Yeah.
What in terms of like tactical things, like a dashboard that you really like, that you feel like really helps drive, even because I know we talked about a lot of big picture things. Are there any really small tactical things that you feel like is like a common thread, or just things that you're like, man, I really loved that?
So the number one way to get the board you want is to train the sin out of your board. If you onboard them properly and they know what their job is, they're going to run with it and do a good job. They're going to want the other board members to also have that level of energy. Success breeds success. So the more you have a governance committee chair, you know what? We should have some training on how to, I don't know, an advisory council. They do training at the next meeting on advisory council. Someone says, I want to help participate in the advisory council. This breeds that energy. So it does come down to leadership, making sure that those people are onboarded, properly trained about what their role is. The second thing would be creating a community or an environment of constant education and a desire for that. I love to end a board meeting with a strategy question. One question every board member can give over the course of the year that challenges the board to think differently about how they're doing things, whether it's a board thing or whether it's a programmatic question. We're going to talk about it. We're not going to make any decisions, just share thoughts from intelligent people who've come together with this common mission in mind. The third thing is we have to understand what the board members' contribution needs and what they want it to be. So they don't always align. And we need to know that from the beginning. I tell board members, I need to know why you want to be on this board. I save children. I get the altruistic reason you want to be on my board. Now I want you to tell me what about board service is going to be rewarding to you? Because coming to a meeting and looking at financials is not my idea of a good time. So what is it going to be that's going to appeal to you? They may say, I've always wanted to know more about financials because I'm not doing that in my business, or always wanted to learn about how to go and talk to people. I'm not comfortable speaking in public. I'm going to make that happen because you deserve to get something out of this as much as I do. If you're contributing in a way that's rewarding to you, you're going to show up for me. We're going to have a mutually beneficial relationship where it's not just me taking, it's going to be me giving back to you. If not, you're going to walk away because you don't see the value in putting me up as a priority.
Ginny, that is so good. I have honestly never thought of the board relationship as reciprocal beyond the altruistic value of just like I'm aligned with the values of the organization. I think that is a solid angle as executive directors are reevaluating their board strategy of, and even just continuing their board strategies of really creating like dynamic engaged boards or re-engaging their boards. And then two, just the longevity of the folks that are on the board unleashing the maximum capacity and potential each has to do good for the organization. If people feel it, they're going to work so much harder for you, because they're not just going to feel like they're like sitting on top of the organization, like doing rubber stamping. They're going to feel a deep connection to the org, the leadership team, and the org is a big part of their development. That is fantastic. So incredible. I know we have just a few minutes left. I could pick your brain all day. This has been fantastic. Tell listeners where they can find you.
So I have a website, capacitytodream.com. And I will say, Michelle, there's a lot of resources. The way I want my executive directors to be successful and boards to be successful. So I have a lot of videos on a variety of topics, completely free on there. And so they can find it there. I'm also on Facebook, such that it is, and what I should say is my team's on Facebook because I don't like social media. I'm also on Instagram and LinkedIn, where I actually interact with audiences.
I saw on your website too that you have different events on nonprofit leadership topics as well.
Yeah, so I go to a lot of conferences and speak with a variety of topics depending on what the audience wants. I'll be at Together SC in February, where I'll be talking about strategic planning, do a lot of talk about strategic planning not being a document that just sits on the shelf. I'll be doing that at the Together SC annual conference, just finished up in North Carolina. They may have videotaped that one. Certainly even if you Google it, there's a lot out there. And I also have a curriculum called TBH. As you've heard me today, I am very direct. So to be honest, was all out of the idea of developing a curriculum for nonprofit executive directors that's the straight truth about what it's like to be an executive director, sometimes the hard truths, things I did wrong, and how we can save you from that. We do 8.5 hours. It's CFRE accredited, and that curriculum is available on my website as well.
Like I said, this has been so incredible, Jenny. When we were launching this podcast, you came to my mind immediately. I
Oh,
have to
thank you.
have Jenny on the podcast. We have to talk about executive presence and board relations. Thank you so much for joining. If you are
Yeah.
a nonprofit leader, make sure to check Jenny out on her website and all the socials. Like she said, tons of free resources that can really just help you on your journey to becoming an incredible leader. Yay. That's a wrap on today's episode of the Business Per Usual show. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. Your feedback helps us reach more entrepreneurs and professionals like you. To stay up to date on the latest episodes and get exclusive bonus content, follow us on social at Taylor Brand Consulting and visit our website at www.taylorbrandconsulting.com. I am Michelle Taylor, and until next time, stay innovative, stay inspired, and keep pushing forward.